Hi! Have you ever wondered why Nike products are still selling in Russia? For example, footballstore.eu, an online sports retailer owned by Russia's Zenit soccer club, sells dozens of Nike branded items. Yet Nike have denied any authorization of the product sale in Russia, claiming they no longer have any Nike-owned physical or digital retail operations in Russia. Welcome to Beefeater's channel. In this video, I'll explain why many Western products are still being sold in Russia, with or without the manufacturer's consent. If you are new to the channel or you're not familiar with my work on other channels, Beefeater Fella publishes detailed research and evidence-led analysis, accompanied by sources and reference links with all research threads. You can find Beefeater's research on Twitter with the username @beefeater_fella. Right, let's get on with this video subject: Russian parallel imports. Now, you may be aware that Russia is subject to sanctions, primarily around the sale of its fossil fuels to G7 and coalition countries. Nearly 1,400 companies, including many of the most internationally recognizable brands, have since February 2022 announced that they would cease or dial back their operations in Russia in protest of Russia's military aggression and the illegal invasion of Ukraine. But nearly 3 years after the invasion, many of these companies' products are still widely sold in Russia, in many cases in violation of Western-led sanctions. Russia's economy is resilient because it is, for the most part, still a market economy. Russia has been allowed to find ways around the sanctions and to keep things going. Aided by the Russian government's legalization of parallel imports, Russian businesses have established a network of alternative supply chains through what we call parallel imports, to import restricted goods through third countries. The companies that make the products have either unwilling or been unable to clamp down on these unofficial distribution networks. The Russian government has even bragged about it. In December 2023, they said that over $70 billion worth of Western goods were imported into the country through the so-called parallel imports. So what are parallel imports? Parallel imports are products designed to be sold in one part of the world where the products are actually intended for. The problem arises when product buyers in the intended countries then re-export the products either directly to a country the product is not intended for, or indeed is sanctioned, or the customer sells the products to another company which then exports the products to a country the product was not intended for, or indeed sanctioned. Evidence shows that in some cases, this supply chain, which results in products being sold to non-intended countries, are explicitly against the brand's intentions, but in many cases, it is with the brand's full knowledge and acquiescence to the supply chain sending products where they should not be sold. The legality of parallel imports is often murky and opaque. Buyers often mask the origins of their company ownership through a series of shell companies, while manufacturers do not like to admit their existence. Parallel imports can be a headache for brands and are extremely time-consuming to track. Russia started boasting about parallel import methods back in June 2022, just 4 months after Russia launched its genocidal war in Ukraine. This arguably should or could have been a starting point for companies to proactively prevent their products from being bought by an intermediary country. An indicator of products risk is seeing a surge in sales to an existing or a new country at volumes previously not realized in the trading relationship. Another simple indicator is that new buyers of their products are entering the market from known Russian trading hubs such as Georgia, Turkey, Kazakhstan, and other countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. Russia has legitimized parallel imports in law. After some foreign companies started to stop direct deliveries of their products to the Russian market through their own businesses or subsidiaries or official distributors, there was a threat of shortages of a number of goods. This was due to the fact that the goods were no longer supplied by official importers, and at that time, third parties were still not allowed to import them without the consent of the manufacturer or right holder. To remedy this, Russia introduced a law in March 2022 which approved a list of goods in a parallel import list scheme. This list is periodically updated with specific products and brands, and the last time it was revised was July 2023. The list of goods officially allowed by the Russian state for parallel importing includes ferrous metals, inorganic compounds, medical and other equipment, ships, spare parts for railways and auto components, consumer goods such as electronics and household appliances, clothing, footwear, and cosmetics. In particular, among the brands approved by the Russian regime for parallel imports include Apple, Samsung, Hewlett-Packard, Asus, Cisco, Dell, Microsoft, Mercedes-Benz, General Motors, and many others. The unmasking of growing parallel imports using published trade data. A study published in February 2024 claimed that EU sanctions on Russia will be massively circumvented via third countries, corroborating mounting concerns that large portions of European exports to other jurisdictions are ultimately being redirected to Russia. A research note by the Lille-based IESEG School of Management found statistical evidence that EU sanctions are massively circumvented for so-called high-priority items, which are subject to EU export restrictions and include manufacturing equipment and electrical components with potential military applications. Over the period October 2022 to September 2023, the EU export of such goods to Russia declined by 3.2 billion euros. But this needs to be seen in the context that EU exports of the same products to Turkey, the UAE, Kazakhstan, and other Kremlin-friendly countries surged by nearly 3 billion euros. From this standpoint, the decline of EU sales in advanced technology and dual-use items to Moscow was seen almost entirely compensated by a sharp increase in exports of the same goods to West and Central Asian countries. The increase in the sale of such goods was especially pronounced in Kyrgyzstan, where exports jumped a whopping 1,682%. Sharp increases were also observed in Kazakhstan and Turkey, Turkey being a NATO member which has continued to hold close ties with Russia since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The report poured cold water on the idea that the observed increases were driven by a sudden spike in domestic demand. The surge of these purchases by third countries is too huge to be entirely caused by an increase in local demand, so that it is evident that the bulk of these products were then re-exported to Russia. This trend would feed into aggregated patterns observed over the course of subsequent EU sanction rounds. After the sanctions were implemented, the collapse of sales of high-priority items to Russia by the EU has been correlated with an atypical surge of their exports to a few other countries which have become Russian trading hubs. Are Western businesses relying on the cloak of parallel imports to distance themselves from liability of funding the genocidal war in Ukraine? Let's look at a few examples of where data confirms the re-export of products and the creation of parallel supply chains established in the clear light of day. Apple is one such business. On the 7th of May 2023, Bloomberg reported that Apple's chief executive officer, Tim Cook, made a pitch during the company's earnings call, pointing out to record-setting sales in many countries around the world, including Mexico, Indonesia, the Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the UAE, which all had best ever quarterly sales in that period, even while overall revenue had declined. Two of these major growth markets had by then been identified as major parallel market exporters of iPhones to Russia. They were Turkey and the UAE. Yet when you analyze Turkey's iPhone market share for the period, it had peaked by just 15% in June 2022. As of February 2024, the operating systems used by mobile phones, specifically iOS, on the Apple, reached 15% of market share in the country, whereas the imports of iPhone volumes suggest that Apple phones were dominant at over 50% in Turkey. Why did this anomaly not flag the fact this clearly indicates that phones are being re-exported out of Turkey? And given the trade data showing a corresponding increase in trade with Russia, why was the plug not pulled or capped on sales to Turkey? Russia was and continues to be the beneficiary of the Apple parallel supply chain setup, and Apple have literally celebrated and lauded their success in Turkey as a developing market. These facts are known by Apple too, and with this information, Apple could restrict and severely deter the parallel import scheme of iPhones to Russia via Turkey, Moldova, the UAE, and other known and documented re-exporters to Russia. But the revenue Apple drives trumps the ethical considerations of the company. Thanks to the parallel export market, Apple's annual earnings results have held steady in a declining market, which Tim Cook openly bragged about in Apple's earnings calls. Another example of parallel markets operating in the clear light of day is in vehicle exports. Russia's parallel trade mechanism last year prompted the EU's top diplomat, Joseph Borrell, to admit to the limits of the EU sanction packages, which in terms of exports only apply to direct European companies' exports to Russia and do not have an extraterritorial effect. We have seen an abnormal increase of third countries importing goods that are banned by the EU, including high-tech products, for example. EU exports of vehicles to Russia reportedly fell by 78% in 2022, while EU exports of the same vehicles to Kazakhstan surged by 268%. In its most recent sanction packages, the European Commission has increasingly focused on banning European companies' trade with businesses in third countries such as China, India, and Turkey that have been found to help Moscow circumvent EU restrictions. The Commission's 14th sanction package has broadened restrictions from individual companies to wider sectors as one of the potential routes to tackle circumvention more effectively. In order to present a balanced view of the difficulties surrounding parallel import schemes and the difficulties that companies have in preventing their products from entering these schemes, let me give you some examples of why it may be very difficult, if not impossible, to prevent some products from entering the market on a parallel import scheme. First one I'd like to talk about is economic disparities and the market arbitrage. So some products are often sold at different prices in different countries due to various factors like market demand, economic conditions, regulatory costs, etc. Nefarious actors take advantage of these price differences by buying products where they are cheap and selling them where they are expensive, and they bypass the authorized distribution channels. This is not always about prevention, but rather than exploiting the market inefficiencies. An example being electronics or pharmaceuticals might be significantly cheaper in one country due to subsidies or lower taxes, making parallel importation very lucrative. The next example is a lack of clear legal frameworks. In many jurisdictions, the legal stance on parallel imports remains ambiguous or not strictly enforced. This ambiguity allows the products to enter the markets through parallel importation, because the legal tools to prevent this are either not there or they are not robust and not consistently applied. Regulatory loopholes and corruption. Even where laws exist, enforcement can be lax due to corruption or regulatory loopholes. Products can be mislabeled or misrepresented during their import, or officials might be bribed to look the other way. An example being discussions on highlighting issues with fake certificates for pharmaceuticals in Nigeria is one of the key topics on social media at the moment, suggesting that regulatory bodies might be overwhelmed or compromised, allowing parallel imports to thrive. The next reason is globalization and the supply chain complexity. The global nature of trade means that products can be sourced from anywhere. This complexity makes it harder for manufacturers to control where their products end up after the first sale, especially under international exhaustion principles where IP rights are considered exhausted once they are sold anywhere. The next reason would be consumer demand for lower prices. Consumers often drive parallel imports by seeking out lower price goods. This demand creates a market for parallel importers. These might not be nefarious, but they are certainly taking advantage of a system where price controls or market segmentation by manufacturers can be circumvented. An example being individuals or small businesses might import products directly from manufacturers or distributors in other countries where they are cheaper, as noted in many discussions on the internet today about purchasing power parity not applying in these scenarios. The next example is technological advancements in distribution. The internet and e-commerce platforms have made it easier for products to be bought and sold across borders without the need for traditional distribution channels. The traditional distribution channels are easier to control. This technological shift facilitates parallel imports by reducing the barriers to entry for importers. The ease of online transactions means products can be sold in markets where they were never intended to be, bypassing the traditional supply chain controls. These are just some of the arguments that illustrate that while there are efforts to prevent products from entering parallel import schemes, the combination of economic incentives, legal ambiguities, regulatory failures, and technological advancements create an environment in which these activities can flourish, often to the benefit of those looking to exploit these systems for profit. Suggested improvements to tackle parallel import rackets. We should be challenging businesses whose products are still freely traded in Russia, asking some key questions such as, has your company put in place appropriate internal mechanisms and tools to carry out enhanced due diligence of your supply chains, intermediaries, customers, and end users to understand the risk of your product's diversion to Russia? Does your company consider potential red flags that suggest the use of front companies that may hide the true end users of your products and thereby evade sanctions and export controls? Has your company taken any other actions to prevent the re-export of products to Russia? Other measures to plug the parallel supply chains include the EU's proposal to make sanction evasion a criminal offence and therefore to put the responsibility on manufacturers. Some of them have begun to require their customers to prove they are physically not in Russia while placing an order, for example. Reviewing orders to countries neighbouring Russia, the Russian Federation, that are used as popular routes and trading hubs for sanction evasion, and identifying recipients that order in bulk. Those recipients are often third-party Russian companies that will organise the onward transportation of goods to customers in the Russian Federation. For brand-abusing websites involved in parallel imports, the affected companies and manufacturers should report the fake company domain to the registrar on trademark abuse claims. Once the original business owner and registrar reclaims the ownership of the domain, purchase the illegally acquired domain to avoid future malicious activities on the site. These measures and other due diligence standards should be implemented across the coalition countries. But the question is there the appetite to actually tackle the supply chain issues that have given rise to the expansion of parallel imports? I hope this thread has cast light on the parallel import market dilemma and provided some insight on the challenges companies face and nation states face as well in tackling the problems. If you want to read a deeper dive into this topic, please use the thread link provided in this clip to my account on Twitter, where sources and references are provided for your own research too. Also, just a quick request, your like, a share and subscription to the channel will really help promote the visibility of my channel. Your opinion matters very much, so please take the time to leave a comment and a suggestion too.